to Sulfur Salon, a podcast dedicated to exploring the intersection of art, literature, and philosophy. Today, we delve into Heller Levinson's thought-provoking book, Query Caboodle 2, published by Sulfur Editions.
This book isn't your typical read. It's a collection of queries, almost koans, that challenge conventional thinking and push the reader into uncharted intellectual territory.
Exactly. Levinson has a knack for stripping away our smug conventions, as one reviewer put it, and forcing us to confront fundamental questions about ourselves and the world around us.
The book's structure is fascinating. Short, pointed questions are interspersed with striking artwork by Mohsen El-Balassi and Ghada Kamal. The visuals add another layer of depth and interpretation to the already complex queries.
One of the central themes seems to be the nature of truth and meaning. Levinson probes the limits of language and logic, asking, does truth have integrity, and will it prove meaningful?
And then there's the exploration of love, loss, and human connection. Questions like, is true love true if it vanishes? And why is it so difficult to remain in love? Resonate deeply with the human experience.
I was also struck by the queries that explore the relationship between humanity and technology. Levinson asks, why do humans gobble up new technologies like so much cotton candy? It's a timely question in our increasingly tech-driven world.
The book also delves into the nature of consciousness and perception. How much of perception is procreative, is one example. It makes you question the very act of observing and interpreting reality.
And the artwork, as we mentioned, is integral to the experience. El-Balassi and Kamal's pieces are often surreal and unsettling, perfectly complementing the book's unsettling queries.
Overall, Query Caboodle 2 is a challenging but rewarding read. It's a book that stays with you long after you finish it, prompting further reflection and questioning. It's definitely not a passive read. It requires active engagement and a willingness to wrestle with difficult ideas.
Absolutely. It's a book that invites you to think differently, to question everything you thought you knew. We highly recommend it to anyone looking for a truly unique and stimulating intellectual experience.
As thinkers.
That's the beauty of it. We're left with more questions than answers.
Okay.
But they're not the kind of questions that frustrate us or leave us feeling lost.
Right.
These are questions that ignite our imaginations, that spark further inquiry, that encourage us to continue exploring these ideas on our own.
So it's not about finding the right answer. It's about embracing the journey.
It is.
The ongoing process of exploration and discovery.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most valuable takeaways from Levinson's work.
Yeah.
He's reminding us that true intellectual engagement is a lifelong process.
Yeah.
A constant dialogue with ourselves, with the world,
Right.
and with those big questions that have always driven human curiosity.
It's like he's giving us a set of tools not to arrive at a destination,
Right.
but to continue exploring the vast and complex landscape of ideas.
Love it.
I love that.
Right.
So if we're handing our listeners a philosophical toolbox, what's the most important tool they should take away from Query Caboodle 2?
That's a good question. For me, it's the power of the query itself.
Yeah.
Levinson shows us how a well-crafted query can be more than just a question. It can be a catalyst for deep thought, for challenging assumptions, and for opening up these new avenues of inquiry.
So it's not about finding the right answer. It's about asking the right questions.
I think so.
Yeah.
And maybe even embracing the fact that some questions don't have easy answers or any answers at all.
And sometimes those most profound questions are the ones that don't have easy answers.
They are the ones that stay with us, the ones we keep circling back to, that we might spend our whole lives trying to understand.
That's so true. And it makes me think about all the queries we didn't get to explore today.
I know, right?
Levinson's book is packed with them. Like, Can Love Be Learned? Page 94.
Oh, yeah.
That one alone
For sure.
could fuel a whole other episode.
It's a testament to the richness of Levinson's work. Each query is like a doorway into a whole new realm of philosophical exploration.
So listener, we're leaving you with a challenge.
Okay.
Take one of Levinson's queries.
Right.
Maybe one we talked about, maybe one we didn't.
Okay.
And really sit with it.
Yeah.
Let it rattle around in your brain.
Yeah.
See where it takes you.
And remember those other sources we explored.
Right.
Think about how the analytical insights from those texts intersect with the poetic explorations in Query Caboodle 2.
Okay.
Are there connections you can make? New questions that emerge?
I mean, we talked about suburban temporality, ambidextrous intimacy, even the philosophy hidden in the objects around us.
Right.
But I bet there are so many more hidden dimensions in Query Caboodle 2.
Oh, I think so.
Just waiting to be uncovered.
It's like he's given us a key to unlock a whole new way of seeing the world.
Yeah.
And it's not just about Levinson's work. You can use these tools to explore your own experiences, your own questions, your own unique corner of the world.
It's like he's saying, hey, the world is full of these amazing puzzles.
It is.
Go out there and start piecing them together.
And you don't have to have all the answers.
Right.
The most interesting discoveries often come from embracing the not knowing.
Yeah.
From that willingness to sit with uncertainty and let the questions guide you.
So listener, if you're feeling a little inspired right now, we encourage you to pick up Query Caboodle 2.
Definitely.
What's really interesting about this collection right off the bat is the structure of the poems. They're not, your typical stanzas and rhyming schemes.
Yeah, not at all.
Sometimes they're like little bursts of thoughts or even like questions scattered on the page.
It's almost as if the way they're arranged visually, it becomes part of the meaning,
Totally. And I was wondering, what do you think Levinson's trying to achieve with this kind of unconventional structure?
Well, I think a lot of it ties into his philosophical ideas. You see these poems that look like fragmented thoughts. Well, you could say it reflects the way we experience the world today,
Right.
All these bits and pieces, the constant influx of information.
It's like trying to make sense of a puzzle where the pieces keep changing shape.
Exactly. It's like he's mirroring that fragmentation, that feeling of uncertainty in the very form of his poems.
And it's not just that, right? There's also the way he uses white space.
The white space.
Indentation, the whole visual layout. It's almost like he's creating these pauses, these moments of silence within the poems.
Yeah, I see that. It's like negative space in art, The emptiness becomes meaningful too.
Like he's giving the reader room to breathe, to contemplate, to come up with their own interpretation.
Absolutely. And he takes that even further by mixing images and ideas that seem completely unrelated at first.
Like, for example, there's this one line. A thought without consequence, a passerby on the body of memory.
Yes.
I mean, what does that even mean?
Right. It's like a riddle,
Yeah.
It forces you to stop and think about how thought and memory work together, how they shape our understanding of the world.
And he does that a lot, doesn't he? Like, he's dropping these little nuggets of wisdom, almost like aphorisms.
Yes, exactly. He's drawing from that aphoristic tradition. You see this with philosophers like Nietzsche, those short, powerful statements that try to capture a universal truth.
But instead of writing essays, he's weaving them into these poems with this really unique structure.
And that creates this really interesting tension, right, between the individual thought in each line and the overall context of the poem.
Okay, so we've got this fragmentation, we've got these aphoristic lines, all creating space for the reader to interpret things in their own way.
Yeah.
But what about the actual themes, the messages behind the poems?
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
What struck me was how often he deals with love, loss, that sense of longing.
Yeah, and also the nature of reality, how we perceive things, the search for meaning in a world that often feels, fragmented.
Exactly. And these themes, they're all interwoven, right? Like when he talks about love, it's never simple.
Right.
There's always this undercurrent of reality melted into imagination.
Like that line, love is a
That's a good one.
It's like he's saying our thoughts, our desires, they can actually influence how we experience the world.
It reminds me of those poems that feel like a stream of consciousness. It's almost like you're inside his head, watching as these thoughts and feelings collide.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder how much of what we consider real is just our own projection, right?
So does Levinson offer any answers? I mean, how do his poems help us cope with that uncertainty, that feeling that everything's in flux?
Well, I don't think his poetry is about giving us concrete answers.
Right.
It's more about showing us how to embrace the questions, to find beauty and meaning even when things are messy and complicated.
To kind of lean into the chaos and find the poetry within it.
Exactly. And you see that in the way he uses language too, like those jarring images, the unexpected humor.
Yeah, like that line, benign tumors looking for a lover.
Oh yeah, that one threw me for a loop the first time I read it.
Right. It's like, what? But then you think about it and it's kind of beautiful in a strange way.
It is, and I think that's part of his genius. He takes these things we normally consider ugly or negative and forces us to see them in a new light.
To appreciate the strangeness, the absurdity of it all.
And that ties back to his whole style, this unconventional structure, the way he mixes up images and ideas. It's all about pushing the boundaries of what poetry can be.
Speaking of pushing boundaries, I notice he throws in some musical references too.
Oh, yeah, like that glamorous howl for cats and trees. It's like he's trying to create a soundscape for his words.
And even beyond the literal references, there's a rhythm to his language that feels musical, almost like jazz.
Definitely. It's like a performance on the page, engaging your mind and your senses.
Which leads me to another interesting thing, how he tackles the idea of identity.
Oh yeah, for sure.
There's this one line that really stood out to me. Once I was a gallon of water and my limbs were fish.
Yeah, that's classic Levinson, isn't it? Playful, surreal, but also hinting at something deeper.
Like the way our identities are always shifting and changing, how we're not just one fixed thing.
Right, like water, we're constantly flowing and transforming. And he reflects that in the different voices he uses in his poems, too.
Sometimes he's speaking directly to you, and then suddenly he's embodying a different persona, a different perspective.
Like he's saying, hey, we all contain multitudes. We're complex creatures with all these different facets.
And I think that's what makes his work so powerful. It's a celebration of that complexity, the good and the bad, the light and the shadow.
It's an invitation to embrace the whole messy, beautiful tapestry of human experience.
Now, I'm curious, what do you think someone who's never really read much poetry would make of Levinson's work?
That's a great question.
Would it feel accessible? Or would it be too challenging, too outside the box?
Well, I think it could be both, honestly. The language is simple enough, and the themes are relatable, things we all think about.
But that unconventional style, that might throw some people off.
Yeah, maybe, but it could also be what draws them in, like, what is this? I need to figure it out.
Because it is kind of like a puzzle, right? You have to be willing to put in the effort to unlock the meaning.
But the rewards are there, believe me. His poetry stays with you. It makes you think about things differently.
It's like a conversation that keeps going, even after you've finished reading.
And a conversation worth having, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap things up, I want to ask you, what's one line or image from Levinson's work that really resonated with you? What will you carry with you from this deep dive?
That's a tough one. There are so many. Let me think for a second.
So many great lines to choose from in Levinson, right?
Yeah.
But we're running out of time.
Oh, yeah. Time flies when you're deep diving.
It really does. But we've talked about the structure, the themes, all those big philosophical ideas. But there's one thing we haven't mentioned yet. Humor.
Ah, yes. Levinson's wit. It's so subtle, almost sneaky.
Right. Like he's slipping in these little jokes under the radar.
It's like he's saying, hey, even when we're talking about life and death and all that heavy stuff, we can still find moments of absurdity.
To laugh at ourselves a little bit.
Exactly. And it keeps the poems from being too serious, too weighed down.
Makes it feel more human, more relatable somehow.
Definitely. It reminds us that life is full of contradictions, that joy and sorrow can coexist.
That even in the darkness, there can be these flashes of light, of humor. And that's what I love about Levinson's poetry. It's not just intellectual, it's emotional. It's about experiencing life in all its messy glory.
Totally. He's not preaching at us. He's inviting us to join him on this journey of exploration,
To see the world through his unique lens and maybe discover something new about ourselves along the way.
And I think that's a pretty powerful thing for poetry to do.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Query Caboodle 2 Global version, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. We talked about water as a symbol of life, change, interconnectedness. But water can also be a mirror, right? Reflecting back at us, what do you think Levinson's poetry reflects back to you? About yourself, about the world, about all those big questions we've been wrestling with?
That's a good one to ponder. It's different for everyone, I guess.
That's the beauty of it. There's no right or wrong answer. It's about what you see, what you feel, what you take away from that experience.
So to our listeners, dive in, explore, and see what Query Caboodle 2 Global version reflects back to you. You might be surprised by what you discover.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's all for this deep dive, folks. Thanks for joining us.
Where achieve is risk. How much of prosperity plunders whence? How much of rapture is jurisprudence? Why does talking to trees make so much sense? Does mental illness occur in animals? How can we verify what lays beyond limits? Where in mathematics is meander? Few is there mathematics without numbers? What does it look like? Yes, there is mathematics without numbers. In fact, some of the most fundamental branches of mathematics, such as topology and abstract algebra, do not rely on numbers at all. Topology is the study of shapes and spaces, without reference to their exact size or shape, for example. A topological space is a set of points with a certain set of rules for how points can be connected to each other. These rules can be described without using numbers, and they can be used to prove theorems about shapes and spaces. Abstract algebra is the study of abstract objects, such as groups and rings. These objects can be described without using numbers, and they can be used to prove theorems about other abstract objects. There are many other branches of mathematics that do not use numbers. For example, graph theory is the study of networks, and it can be used to model real-world phenomena, such as the spread of diseases or the flow of traffic. Game theory is the study of games, and it can be used to analyze strategic situations in business and politics. Mathematics is a vast and ever-evolving field, and there is always more to learn. Even if you are not interested in the branches of mathematics that do not use numbers, there is no doubt that you will encounter them at some point in your life. Branches of mathematics that do not use numbers, there is no doubt that you will encounter them at some point in your life.
There's drive, dissolve is maintaining drive. Without recognition, heroic. Why? How much of temperance is indecision? How much of iridescence is travail? Harmonize. You say there is the void, therefore the void is not nothing, therefore it is not the void. How much of void is hearsay? How many ships can water remember? How much of the scene is obscene? How much of the void is hearsay? How many ships can water remember? How much of the sea
Wherein the
is
fallacy is
obscene?
redemption, wherein the blizzard is obscurity. How much of wisdom is unsuspecting? How much of wisdom is unmitigated? How much of wisdom is unmistakable? How much of wisdom is incalculable? Why so often in a relationship is the question asked, where is this headed? Is love geographic? Does it possess a cardinal direction? North, east, south, west, north by northwest? Where the correct response to the question be to pull out a compass? Where in the dissolution is bustle? Where in the bustle is bristle? Why do humans gobble up new technologies like so much cotton candy? What's the fierce attraction? Where in the approach is concern? How much of love is anchorage? How much of love is accidental?
How much does the drive for recognition direct one's life?
Without recognition, does drive dissolve? Is maintaining drive without recognition heroic? Why?
How much of temperance is indecision? How much of iridescence is travail? Harmonize.
You say there is the void, therefore the void is not nothing, therefore it is not the void.
How much of void is hearsay?
How many ships can water remember?
How much of the scene is obscene? How much of sustainability is porous? Where in the fallacy is redemption? Where in the blizzard is obscurity? How much of wisdom is unsuspecting? How much of wisdom is unmitigated? How much of wisdom is unmistakable? How much of wisdom is incalculable? Why so often in a relationship is the question asked, where is this headed? Is love geographic? Does it possess a cardinal direction? North, east, south, west, north by northwest? Would the correct response to the question be to pull out a compass? Where in the dissolution is bustle? Where in the
muscle is bristle. Why do humans gobble up new technologies like so much cotton candy? What's the fierce attraction? Wherein the approach is concerned.
How much of void is hearsay? How many ships can water remember? How much of the sea is obscene? How much of sustainability is porous? Where in the fallacy is redemption?